Wyoming Territory, September 1874. The wind howled through the cottonwoods along the Snake River, and the widow stood her ground on the porch with a Sharp's rifle in her hands. "Back off," Laurel Renshaw shouted, shoulders squared, dress dusty, eyes hard. "I am not marrying any man just because you all think I need protection." A line of ranchers and townsfolk stood in the dirt yard below, shifting their weight, hats in hands. Sheriff Douglas tightened his jaw. "Laurel, you got 2 children and a spread worth stealing. No man around to scare off the wrong kind. You need someone under your roof." "I had a man," she said, voice cracking just once before she caught it, "and he's buried out back under the cottonwood. I don't need another." A soft cry came from inside. Laurel turned her head just enough to see her 5-year-old daughter, Flora, step into the doorway, clutching her rag doll. "Mama," Laurel lowered the rifle just enough to not scare her child, but her eyes stayed locked on the sheriff. "I will keep my family safe." "My way." The crowd began to grumble, some muttering that she was stubborn, reckless, even ungrateful. But before anything more could be said, the sound of hooves cut through the tension. A lone rider came up from the ridge, dust on his coat, saddle worn and quiet. He dismounted with a kind of calm that made even the louder men go still. "Elijah Rourke," Sheriff Douglas said, surprised. "I thought you rode south after the war." "I did," Elijah said, voice low but clear, "but I heard trouble had come to the Renshaw place." Laurel blinked. "You know me?" He looked straight at her. "Well enough. Your husband saved my life at Cold Harbor. We fought together. Name was Clay Renshaw, right?" She nodded once, her throat tight. Elijah stepped forward, hat in hand. His coat was patched, his boots worn, but he stood tall, steady. "I owe him a debt. I came to pay it." "I do not need charity," Laurel said, eyes flashing. "No," Elijah said gently, "but you might need a fence mended and someone to watch your back so you can sleep through the night." The crowd shifted again, but quieter now. Sheriff Douglas narrowed his eyes. "You offering to marry her, Cowboy?" Laurel's breath caught. "No," Elijah looked at her. "I am offering to stay on, work the land, keep her and the children safe. She can decide later if she wants more." Laurel stared at him. Nobody else had given her a choice. "Fine," the sheriff said, rubbing his temples, "but if anything happens out here, it is on your head, Elijah." "I will take it," Elijah said and turned to Laurel, "if you will have me." She studied him for a long moment. Her heart thudded in her chest, but not from fear. He had not come to claim or to corner, just to offer. "You can sleep in the barn," she said finally. His lips twitched just barely. "Fair enough." That night, after Flora and her 2-year-old brother Finn were asleep in their shared bed, Laurel sat by the fire watching the flames dance. She had not cried since Clay died 3 months ago, not even when the banker hinted at foreclosure if she could not keep up the land. Outside, she heard the slow step of boots on packed dirt. Elijah stood just outside the door, his silhouette tall against the moonlight. "You still awake?" he asked. Laurel opened the door and he stepped just inside the threshold, hat in hand. "I fixed the chicken coop," he said, "and patched the west fence. You got wolves nearby." She nodded. "I know." He looked around the small room, cluttered but clean. "You made a good home." "I tried." Her voice was low. "It has just been hard since I know," he said, and there was something in his voice, something worn but understanding. "I lost my brother in the war, came back to nothing. I know what it means to build from ashes." She swallowed. "Why did you really come?" Elijah looked at her, slow and steady. "Because Clay talked about you more than anything else. Said if anything ever happened to him, someone ought to make sure you and the kids were all right. He saved me twice. I could not live with myself if I did nothing." Laurel's voice was barely above a whisper. "And now," his gaze didn't waver, "now I am here because I want to be." For a moment, the fire crackled and nothing else moved. Finally, Laurel pulled her shawl tighter and nodded. "There is coffee in the kettle if you want some." He stepped closer, and for the first time all day, she did not feel like she had to guard herself. "Thank you," he said. They stood together in the soft light, 2 people who had lost too much but were not quite ready to give up on something good. Outside, the wind died down. The land, for a little while, was quiet, safe. Mist clung low to the riverbanks the next morning, dew silvering the brush and fence posts. Laurel's boots sank slightly in the damp earth as she made her way down to the paddock, bucket in hand. She'd risen before first light, as always, but found the barn door already open and the bay gelding brushed down and fed. The sight gave her pause. She stepped inside, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. Elijah was near the back stall, binding a cracked tool handle with rawhide strips. "You fix that spade too?" she asked, voice flat from sleep. He didn't look up. Handle was split clean through, could have thrown it out but seemed a waste. She leaned her shoulder against the frame. "I was going to get to it, I know." He tied off the last strip and stood, wiping his hands on his trousers. "Just figured I'd beat you to it." Laurel didn't answer right away. The barn smelled of cut hay and dust, familiar and grounding. She watched him for a moment, the way he moved efficient, quiet, like he didn't want to draw attention to himself. Not a man used to taking up space. "You ever work cattle?" she asked finally. "Some," he said. "Mostly horses. My uncle bred Mustangs west of Abilene." "I helped break 'em before I went east," she nodded once. "I've got 2 steer gone lame. They'll need tending if they're to make it through winter." "I'll look at them after breakfast." Laurel straightened. "I make corn mush." "It's not much." "I've eaten worse," he said, and something in his tone made her glance at him more closely. He didn't elaborate, and she didn't ask. Later, inside the house, Flora sat at the table swinging her legs while Finn pressed his cheek to the warm wood, half asleep. Laurel set bowls in front of them, then poured the last of the milk into a cup and offered it to Elijah. He took it without speaking, nodding his thanks. Flora tilted her head, studying him. "Are you a cowboy?" she asked. Elijah met her gaze. "I suppose so. Do you shoot people?" Laurel shot her a look. "Flora, it's all right," Elijah said. "Only if I have to." "Did you have to?" she asked, solemn. He looked at her for a long moment, then rested his hands on the table. "Yes." "A few times." Flora seemed to consider this, then nodded once and returned to her mush. After breakfast, Laurel gathered her hair behind her head and tied it back with a strip of linen. "If you're staying, you'll need to know the line of the property. Come walk it with me." He followed her out past the corral, through the tall grass where the fence split along the ridge. The morning sun was warm on their backs, but the wind off the hills carried a bite that hinted at early snow. They walked in silence for a while, the land stretching wide around them, yellowing grass swaying under the breeze. A hawk circled high above, its cry sharp and alone. At the edge where the pasture dipped toward the ravine, she stopped and pointed. "That line there's been disputed. My neighbor, Silas Mott, claims the ridge belongs to him. My husband marked it before he died, and I won't give it up." Elijah followed her gaze. "You think he'll press it?" "He already has. Sent a man to tear down the post 2 weeks ago. I ran him off with warning shots." "He hasn't been back." Elijah nodded, his jaw tight. "You think he'll try again?" "I'd bet on it." He looked out over the ridge, then back at her. "You got a claim filed with the county," "My husband did. It's on record in Jackson. I have the copy inside." "Good. We'll keep it close." They stood there for a long while, the prairie wind pulling at their clothes, the silence between them no longer uncomfortable. Laurel glanced at him, noting the way he kept one hand near his belt, even in peace. It wasn't jumpy, it was habit, like a man who'd learned long ago the world could turn fast. "You've no family left?" she asked. He shook his head. "None that speak my name." She let that sit. "I didn't come here to start over," he added, voice quiet. "But I'm not walking away if there's something worth staying for." Her throat tightened, but she didn't look away. "I don't need a man to keep my land," she said. "I believe you. But I might need a man who won't try to take it from me." He nodded once. "Then you've got me." Laurel turned back toward the house, the wind pushing against her shoulders. She didn't speak again until they reached the back porch. "You can take the small room off the kitchen," she said. "It's got a cot and a wood stove. I'll expect you at supper." He tipped his hat. "Yes, ma'am." She watched him walk toward the barn, his steps slow, deliberate, like a man measuring his place in unfamiliar soil. Inside, Flora was humming to herself, brushing her doll's hair. Finn had curled up on the rag rug, thumb in his mouth. The fire in the hearth was low, and for the first time in weeks, Laurel didn't feel the weight of the walls pressing in. She stepped to the window and looked out. Elijah was splitting kindling beside the barn, sleeves rolled to his elbows, sweat already soaking into the back of his collar. She didn't smile, but something in her chest eased. For the first time since the burial, she was no longer bracing for the next thing to go wrong. By mid-October, the aspens along the creek turned gold, and the mornings came edged with frost. Laurel kept the stove burning longer, and Elijah rose early to break ice from the trough before the children stirred. The rhythm between them settled into something workable, quiet, steady, without the need for constant words. One afternoon, she found him in the lean-to, sharpening the blade of an old drawknife. She stepped closer, wiping flour from her hands onto her apron. "I got a letter from Clay's brother," she said, not bothering with a greeting. Elijah paused, the whetstone stilled. "James," she nodded. "Says he's coming through in a week's time, wants to speak face to face." He set the blade aside. "You expecting trouble? He's after the land." Her fingers tightened on the apron's edge. "Says Clay promised it to him if anything happened." Elijah studied her face. "Did he?" "No," she looked away. "Not once." "Then I'll be here when he comes," she hesitated. "He's blood, I can't turn him away without hearing him." "I didn't say don't hear him." Elijah's voice was even. "I said I'll be here." She gave a small nod, then turned to go, but his voice stopped her. "You ever think about selling it?" he asked. She looked over her shoulder. "What, the land," he said. "Might be easier somewhere else." "Easier's never been my aim," he didn't argue. That evening, after Flora and Finn were asleep, Laurel sat at the table shelling beans while Elijah stitched a tear in his shirt by the fire. The lamplight threw long shadows, pooling in the corners. "My father died when I was 17, she said, eyes on her work. "Left us with a half-cleared homestead and a mule that wouldn't pull straight. My mother tried to keep it going, but the wind broke her before the year was out." Elijah didn't speak, just kept the thread moving, neat and even. "I married Clay for love," she said, "not for what he could offer. I've never been one to look for a man to carry me. I never figured you for one." She looked up. "Then why are you still here?" He set the needle down and met her eyes. "Because I've watched you hold this place together with nothing but grit and will. And because I find I sleep lighter knowing you're not facing it alone." Laurel let out a slow breath. "That's not the same as wanting me." "No," he said, "it's not." They were quiet after that, each lost in thought, the fire popping softly behind them. 3 days later, James Renshaw arrived. The wagon creaked up the trail late in the morning, drawn by a sway-backed mare and driven by a man with Clay's eyes but none of his warmth. He climbed down stiffly, glancing around as if the house had already failed some test. "You've let the gate sag," he said by way of greeting. Laurel didn't answer. Elijah stood beside her, arms crossed, boots planted firm. James took his hat off, but only out of habit. "I came because Clay meant for this land to stay in our name. I've got a claim drawn up. You can sign it, and I'll give you 200 in silver. Enough to get you someplace easier." She didn't move. "The land's not for sale," he raised an eyebrow. "You think you can keep it through winter with no man to back you?" Elijah stepped forward. "She's not alone." James looked him over. "You the hired help." "I'm the man standing between you and her door," Elijah said. James's face tightened. "You think you've got some right to speak for her?" Elijah didn't look away. "No, but I've got the right to stand beside her if she wants me there." Laurel's voice cut in, low and steady. "He does," James scoffed. "You'd rather tie yourself to a stray than take an honest deal from family." "I'd rather stand on my own 2 feet with someone who doesn't see me as a burden." James shook his head, stepping back toward his wagon. "You'll regret this come snow." Laurel didn't flinch. "Then I'll regret it on my own land." He left without another word, the wagon grinding down the trail until it vanished behind the ridge. That night, Laurel found Elijah near the woodpile, stacking the last of the chopped oak. "You didn't have to speak for me," she said. "I didn't," he said, not looking up. "I spoke beside you." She stepped closer, her breath visible in the evening chill. "I've never had that before." He set the last log down and turned to her. "You do now." Laurel reached out, fingers brushing his. "Stay." Elijah didn't move away. "You sure?" "I am," she said. "Not because I need you, because I want you here." His hand closed over hers, rough and warm. "Then I'll stay as long as you'll have me." They stood in the fading light, the wind settling into stillness around them, and for the first time since Clay's death, Laurel felt something begin, not a replacement, but a new root taking hold. Something strong, something lasting. By late October, the wind came down from the Tetons sharp and biting, and the first dusting of snow clung to the north-facing slopes. Laurel spread ashes on the walk and hung heavy quilts over the windows at night. Inside, the stove glowed red through the iron grate, and the scent of drying apples filled the house. Elijah spent his days hauling wood, repairing the root cellar door before the deep freeze, and checking the trap lines he'd set along the creek's edge. Laurel noticed how he never waited for instruction. Never asked what needed doing, he simply read the land, the season, and the way the house moved, and met it with quiet hands. One morning, while she poured water from the kettle into the dishpan, he stepped through the back door, hat dusted with frost. "Found a fox caught in the iron jaw near the gulch," he said, pulling off his gloves. "Still breathing when I came on it, I let it go." She set the kettle down. "You lose the pelt," he nodded. "Didn't feel right the way it looked at me, like it knew I had the choice." She watched him scrub the blood from his knuckles at the basin. "You always that soft-hearted." "Not always," he said, rinsing his hands. "But lately, I've got less stomach for killing things that ain't done me harm." That night, after the children were put down and the wind clawed at the shutters, Laurel sat at the table mending Finn's wool socks. Elijah leaned by the hearth, oiling the metal parts of the rifle he'd brought with him from the war. "You ever think about leaving again?" she asked, eyes on her stitching. He looked up. "Where would I go? There are other places, warmer ones, towns without memories." He set the cloth down. "I'm not looking to outrun mine," she nodded slowly. "Clay used to talk about Texas sometimes, said there was land cheap down there, mesquite trees and longhorn herds. I never saw it." "I did," Elijah said. "Dry country, wind that never stops, folks tough as boot leather. Not much grows, but what does hangs on hard." She stopped sewing. "You miss it." "I miss who I was before the war," he said, "but I don't think he's waiting for me down there." The fire snapped behind them, pulling shadows across the floor. Laurel stood and crossed to the mantel, laying the socks beside the candle stub. "You've been carrying that rifle like you expect something bad to come," she said. "Habit. It's still loaded." He nodded. She turned to face him. "Show me how to use it." He blinked once, then stood. "You sure? I've got children to protect," she said, "and I won't always have you within shouting distance." He handed it to her gently. "It's heavy." "I'll manage." They stepped onto the back porch, breath clouding in the cold. He guided her fingers over the stock, the lever, the trigger. Her hands were steady. "Pull it tight to your shoulder," he said, his voice low. "If you don't, it'll kick you hard." She did. He stepped behind her, not touching, just close enough to speak. "Line it up with that stump," he said. "Exhale slow. Then squeeze." The shot cracked through the trees, scattering 2 crows from the fence line. The stump split at the edge. Laurel lowered the rifle, blinking at the smoke. "Good," Elijah said. "Real good." She turned, cheeks flushed from the cold, and met his eyes. "I don't want to depend on you because I'm afraid. I want to choose you because I'm not." He didn't speak. "I buried one man already," she said. "I know what it costs to love someone, and I still want this." He reached out and brushed a curl back from her temple, his hand rough but careful. "Then we'll build it slow and right." Inside, the house was still warm. She hung the rifle above the doorframe and barred it for the night. Elijah settled into the chair beside the fire, and she sat across from him, the silence between them full of understanding. Snow began to fall softly against the windows. There was no fear in it anymore, only the start of something enduring. November settled in with a gray hush. The river ran slower under its skin of ice, and the cattle moved stiff and quiet through the snow-dusted pasture. Laurel kept the children close to the hearth these days, brushing out Flora's hair by firelight and singing softly while Finn napped against her side. The days were short now, and the nights long enough for old memories to stir if she didn't keep her hands busy. Elijah had taken to sleeping in the room off the kitchen, though some nights she heard him pacing past the stove after the fire died down. He didn't speak of those hours, and she didn't ask. But one morning she found a carved wooden horse on the table, no larger than her hand, smoothed and polished from his whittling knife. Finn clutched it tight that night, and Laurel said nothing except to tuck the blanket firmer around his shoulders. Toward the second week of the month, a letter arrived, carried by a trapper passing through from Jackson. It was addressed in a hand she didn't recognize. Elijah opened it at the table without comment, eyes scanning the page, his fingers tightened at the edges. "What is it?" she asked, setting down the cloth she'd been hemming. "My name," he said after a long silence, "was listed in a land registry in Laramie. A man there's trying to track down survivors from our company. Says the government's releasing soldier claims to those who served under Colonel Harlan in Virginia." "You served under him," he nodded once. "Only at the end, but I was there." She leaned forward. "What does it mean? If I sign and ride out to Laramie, they'll give me 80 acres. Good bottomland from what the letter says. Water access, timber." Laurel felt her chest pull tight. "Would you go?" He looked up then, and something in his face made her breath catch. "Not if it means leaving this, but it's land of your own. I've never wanted land just for myself." She stood and crossed to where he sat, placing her hand on the tabletop. "If you want it, we'll find a way. I won't be the reason you miss a chance." He turned his palm up beneath hers. "You're the only thing I've ever chosen that felt like a beginning." That night, after the children were asleep and the wind had died to stillness, she opened the door to his small room beside the kitchen. He looked up from where he sat by the stove, boots off, shirt unbuttoned at the collar. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. "I'm not asking for someday," she said. "I'm ready now." His expression didn't shift, but he rose slowly, meeting her where she stood. "You sure?" "I know what I want," she said. "And I know what I'm not afraid of anymore." He touched her cheek, rough, thumb gentle. "Then come here." She leaned into him, and the kiss they shared was quiet, steady, without rush, the kind of thing built on long days and earned trust. By the next morning, she'd moved his cot into the main bedroom. Flora asked no questions, only smiled when Elijah braided her doll's hair with a practiced hand. Finn clambered into his lap after supper and fell asleep against his chest. Snow came heavy the last week of November. They sealed the windows and took turns keeping the fire alive through the deepest nights. Elijah taught Flora how to carve a whistle from pine, and Laurel showed him how to make corn cakes the way her mother once did, thin, crisp, and full of salt. On the first clear day, they hitched the wagon and drove into town, bundled in shawls and wool. At the courthouse, the clerk looked them over and nodded when Laurel gave her name. "We're here for a license," Elijah said, his hand warm at her back. The clerk blinked. "You mean marriage?" Elijah didn't hesitate. "That's right." The ceremony was plain, held in the back room with a copy of the good book and the sheriff as witness. Flora held Laurel's hand, and Finn clapped when Elijah kissed her slow and soft beneath the low rafters. They drove home in silence, the children drowsy between them. Snowflakes blew across the road, but the wind no longer had teeth. That winter they lived tight to the hearth, reading by lamplight, mending what wore through and speaking in the language of small gestures. A touch to the shoulder, a folded shirt left by the bed, a hand reaching for another beneath the quilt. By spring, Laurel had planted new rows behind the barn, and Elijah had built a second chicken coop from old boards and iron nails. James never returned. The ridge stayed quiet. Elijah never sent off for the land in Laramie. The letter stayed folded in the drawer beside the rifle, untouched. "Some things," he said, "are worth more when you stay put." Laurel believed him. Years passed. Flora learned to read from the Bible and write her name in careful script. Finn took to horses young, and Elijah taught him to ride with reins loose and spine straight. They added a second room to the house, then a third. A son was born the following winter, dark-haired and quiet like his father. They named him Clay. The land held. They held. Laurel never forgot the sound of boots on the porch that first day, or the way Elijah had looked at her like she was something worth standing beside. And he never stopped reaching for her hand when the nights grew long. They sat together often in the evenings, watching the sun draw gold over the hills, 2 chairs side by side, fingers laced. Peace wasn't something they found. It was something they built, one steady day at a time.